Today we're going to talk about how to break down a pork carcass, and we're actually going to take this particular carcass and break it down into wholesale cuts as well as some subprimals, and show some retail cuts as well that we can get out of this particular carcass. This carcass weighed 200 pounds including his other side, so this particular one side should weigh roughly around 100 pounds. The live animal itself was around 270 pounds, which is fairly typical of the average harvest weight for pigs in this country, which tend to run between 265 to 300 pounds. Now, when you have a pork animal that's coming in, a pig is coming in for slaughter, typically about 70% of that live weight is going to go into the cooler as a carcass. Obviously, there's several factors that will affect this. The amount of gut fill, how much food was left in the stomach, the last time it was weighed. Pigs can lose 10, 15, 20 pounds in a 24-hour period. Well, last time they took a drink of water. All that will affect what we call the dressing percentage. Pigs typically will dress around 70%. And so to begin with talking about this carcass, the easiest thing to do is to remove the front and back feet. We're going to go ahead and remove this back foot. We're going to come in about 2 inches off of where the heel of the ham comes down and meets the leg. We're going to get about 2 inches right in here. Straight cut across. And come to the front foot. We're going to remove the front foot from the shoulder. Usually about halfway up is what I typically remove it at. Although some individuals may shudder at the thought, these feet do have value. And the reason why I say they shudder at the thought, we can make this into pickled pig's feet. They do have value in that realm, even though not a lot of folks are big fans of that. They still has an avenue that we can take these feet. We can also come in here and dig the lean tissue out of these for sausage. So these do have value. If we look at the rib cage of this particular pig, cattle and sheep will have 13 pairs of ribs. Pigs, on the other hand, will have anywhere between 13 to 16 ribs. In the old days, farmers would breed pigs for length, and it was commonly known that when you start breeding length of the loin, is what they were breeding into, you had to actually add ribs. And so whenever we start counting ribs for marks to break carcasses, we always start at the very front. And so you can see here we have one rib all the way down to probably 14, 15 ribs in this particular carcass. We're going to next remove this shoulder between, and I'd like to cut between the second and third ribs. So we're going to go right in here, aim for the middle. You will see some people actually come in here and separate between the first and second rib. I've even heard of some individuals doing the European method, which is closer between the fourth and fifth rib. But here at the University of Kentucky, we prefer to break our pigs between the second and third ribs. That helps not only give us a nice sized loin, but also gives us a Boston butt that's fairly sizable as well. We're actually cutting through two separate bones. We're cutting through not only the backbone, but the shoulder blade as well. And so it's a good idea to just go ahead and plan on making your cut all the way to the block top. So once we get down to the skin and the fat, we're going to separate it. What I think is really interesting about pigs and cattle and sheep and any animal that walks on four legs is this entire front leg, from the shoulder blade all the way down to the front hoof, is not attached to the rest of the skeleton. So you can see, my big knife here, you can see right here's the shoulder blade, here's the backbone. I can shove my knife all the way through and did not touch a bone inside there at all. So theoretically, you can cut that front section off without hitting a bone at all. Now, the reason why we bring that up is that tells you a lot about the tenderness of these particular cuts. Muscles of locomotion tend to be a little bit tougher than muscles of support. Muscles of locomotion have bigger muscle fibers. They have a more dense connective tissue matrix than muscles of support. These muscles of support through the loin and the sirloin and the rib tend to be more tender. They have smaller muscle fiber sizes. They don't have as dense a connective tissue as muscles of locomotion. And so if you stop and think about this, here's this front leg that's not attached to the rest of the skeleton, and theoretically most of the weight of the animal is towards the front. So that speaks volumes about the strength of the muscles in there. Okay? So what I like to do next is come in here and remove these backbones, and basically all I'm really doing is, you can see how I got my knife just following the lay of the bone. Pull back a little bit so I can see where I'm cutting. You see how this backbone kind of, the vertebrae come down and then swoop around to the rib, so you need to make sure you kind of, once you get to that point, you start to angle your knife upwards. Come back down here underneath the backbone. Come back alongside the vertebrae and have our two cuts meet. Again, this particular cut does have value. I could have somebody come in here and pick all the lean muscle out of here for sausage, or you can actually smoke and cure this particular piece, cut it into little chunks, and you'd have like a smoked neck bone that you could use for seasoning. So we're seasoning vegetables is what you can use that for. So we removed our backbone. Here we've got a little bit of a jowl. We'll come in here and we can remove the jowl. Use that for jowl bacon. We can smoke and cure that particular cut and make it into jowl bacon. Okay? Not an extremely popular cut in the United States, but nonetheless, you still have some individuals that are seeking that product. So now we're left with our two main cuts, our Boston butt and our picnic. And I need to separate the Boston butt from the picnic. And you can see where the blade bone is and how it lies in here. Typically what I will do is come in here about an inch off of the blade bone. All right, so we're going more towards the front foot here. And I just make a nice cut. You can see how my knife is kind of hitting a bone, and that's what I want. Take my saw. Finish the cut. Once I cut through the bone, then I can take my big steak knife and continue the cut across. Again, there's our picnic. Picnics are not an extremely popular cut in the U.S., but they are popular overseas, and you will see a lot of these particular cuts going towards the Pacific Rim, Japan, Korea, countries like that. They're a little bit more appreciative of this cut. If you do see them in the United States, typically they're cured and smoked as a picnic, or picnic ham is where you're going to see those. Others will remove the lean tissue, referred to as boning out. We're going to remove the bone. That's where the term boning out comes from. And this will be used for sausage. Set him off to the side. So get the camera in here. This cut is, it can be as simple as just starting to take 3/4 inch or 1 inch steaks off of this for pork steaks. However, his culinary powers are more great than just pork steak. What we like to do here at UK is we will fill up a big lug or an ice chest at home. If you can do this with an ice chest or a cooler at home, fill it up with water, a little bit of pickling salt. The reason why we use pickling salt, it's a finer salt, it's easier to dissolve in cold water, and a jar of molasses. And we'll pour that in there and mix it up really well, and then start dropping these Boston butts inside that brine, if you will. and we'll leave them in there for about 12 to 24 hours. We bring them out, pack them dry, and then we will cover them with one of our favorite rubs that we like to use here at UK. And then we will put this in the smokehouse at a very low temperature, somewhere between 200 to 225. And it's going to set inside that smokehouse for the next 18 to 20 hours. And we know it's done when we can reach with our fingers and pull this blade bone out cleanly. When we get to that point, we know this particular cut is done. We'll bring it out and then we just shred it. And then that's where you get your pulled pork. That's what the Boston butt is excellent for, is pulled pork. And that's where at the University of Kentucky, when we start to feed individuals on campus, we make a lot of pulled pork, or if we're doing picnics or gatherings, tailgates, those type of things, either tailgating for football games or tailgating at our local racetrack, Keeneland, we'll serve a lot of this. We also sell this through our butcher shop as well. We removed our shoulder, we removed the Boston butt from the picnic. Now we're left the remaining portion of the carcass. Next, we're going to remove this ham. And you can see this bone right here. This is referred to as the H bone, A-I-T-C-H, H bone. It's 1/2 of the pelvic girdle, all right? There's the H bone. The reason why I point that out, it's going to be my next marker for cutting this particular cut. And so I usually like to go about 2 fingers or about 2 inches off of the H bone. And you can see how I got my saw, how it's angled. I want to make sure that when I remove this ham from the loin saddle, that I'm making this cut so it's perpendicular to the flow of the shank. So when we're done with this particular cut, when we turn the ham up on its butt face, you're going to see that the shank should be pointing straight up. Okay? And again, we're going to cut through the bone. You can almost hear how the saw sounds different. You hear it actually cutting through the bone, and then once we're through the bone, you hear kind of more of a soft sound, all right? We just want to cut through the bone on this particular cut. Then we're going to remove the rest of it with our knife. So here's our ham. Let's see how good we were, all right? There we go. See how the shank is pointing straight up in the air? So when you make that cut, if you go about 2 inches from the H bone, and so your cut is perpendicular to the flow of the shank should point straight up when you're done, all right? And then we can come in here, we can remove what's left of the tail bones. Some folks will actually come in here and remove the flank. There's a lymph gland in that fat as well. So we're just going to remove this straight down. You can see there's the lymph gland, just like lymph glands in human beings. They serve a purpose, but from a cooking standpoint, we like to remove those guys. So you can see there's another lymph gland. We're going to remove him as well. So there's our ham. Now, the ham has a lot of possibilities. For example, we can come in here, we can remove the H bone and then separate the individual muscles away from each other. After removing the H bone, separate the muscles, clean them up, remove some of the fat, inject them with a brine. The brines usually contain salt, sugar, sodium nitrite, sodium erythorbate, flavors and seasonings, and create a wet cured, or what we call in the Southeast is a city ham. So we can do that with this particular cut. But here in the Southeast, we like to make what's called the country ham, and we do have an instructional video for making a country ham to kind of plug that video as well, where we're going to leave this guy whole, and we're going to take our dry cure mixture, which is mainly salt and brown sugar with a little bit of black pepper, red pepper, and a little bit of paprika in there as well. And we're going to coat this entire ham with that cure mixture and allow it to penetrate through the ham all the way to the bone. City hams can be made in a matter of a few hours, whereas a good country ham takes several months to make. All right. We've removed the shoulder, we've removed the ham. Now we're left with the loin saddle. And here we have our full pork loin as well as our bacon. All right. Now, when I remove the belly from the loin, what I like to do is, you can see this muscle here is the tenderloin. Okay, the way the spec reads for this is we're going to start our cut immediately ventral. This side is dorsal, this side is ventral. All right, the way to remember that is a shark, you see his dorsal fin sticking out of the water. So this is dorsal, this is the back of the animal. You can see I got my cut started. I'm just going to take my knife and drag it back until I reach that first rib. Okay. Then with my saw, I'll flip this around so you can see it. I'm going to come in about right here, about an inch or 2 inches from the backbone is where I'm going to make that cut. See how I've got my saw lined up right there? I'm just going to cut through the ribs. We have more students struggle with making that cut than it appears, and the only way I can tell you is let the saw do the work. You've paid for this entire blade, use the entire length. You've purchased this saw so it can do the work. So if you let the saw do the work as you're cutting through there and not force it, it's an easier way of cutting through the bone. So now that we're through the bone, I'm going to continue to remove this. Set that off to the side. So now you can see there's our belly. Now, there are certain times of the year where this belly is actually worth more than the loin. And we're going to take this belly and we're going to make bacon out of it. And everybody loves bacon, but we have one issue right here is we always have boneless bacon. We've never really had bone-in bacon, so we've got to remove these ribs. And again, I'm going to take my knife and just follow the ribs, the natural flow of the ribs, follow the bones. Come in here. Now, you got to be careful when we get up closer to where the sternum was. There's a lot of little bits of cartilage that we don't want to cut through. And there's our spare ribs. So we can come in here right where you can see the flow of the rib. Here's the sternum. There's a piece of cartilage in there we can cut right on through on those individuals. So you can see we've cut through that. And what's neat about that is when we cook these particular ribs, when we're done, we can just take our knife and cut in between the individual ribs and enjoy. Spare ribs require a little bit of time. These are what we call, I wouldn't necessarily say they're muscles of locomotion, but we use them quite a bit because these muscles in between these ribs contract and relax when the animal is breathing. And so they do tend to be a bigger muscle fiber with a little bit more connective tissue than the muscles of support. And so you'll see individuals put these in water and boil them and then put them on the grill. I've had others that use a broiler in their oven, put them in there, cover you got the water in the bottom of the broiler, cover them with foil, put them in there at about 250 degrees for a few hours. And basically what that water is doing is when it heats up and produces steam is it's actually reacting with the connective tissue and softening that connective tissue up. And then we'll take these and put these out on the grill and finish them out on the grill to get that nice smoky flavor. So there's our spare ribs. If you're doing this for a retail display, sometimes we'll see the sternum inside and flip them over like that. Now we're left with something that everybody loves, and that's the belly, which we're going to turn into bacon. Much like with the country ham and the city ham, we can have a country bacon or a city bacon. City bacon is what you typically will see in the grocery stores. We will inject a brine, still made with water, salt, sugar, nitrite, sodium erythorbate flavors and seasonings, and we will inject this into the belly. Usually we inject it to where it picks up about 12% of its green weight. And what you see here is a green weight. It's an uncured, green is the term we use for uncured. You'll see it sometimes pumped to 112%, meaning that, not that they pumped 112% of its weight, just meaning that it was 12% intake that they put on in this belly. And then we'll put it in the smokehouse. And what a lot of people don't realize with bacon is when we put this in the smokehouse and we're cooking it, chances are we're only going to take it to an internal temperature of about 125 or so. And the reason being is that belly's going to come out of the smokehouse, and then it's going to be sliced, and then you're going to take it home and fry it in your favorite skillet. I prefer cast iron, but that's me. Others have different preferences for what they cook their bacon in. But you're going to cook it the rest of the way there. Another reason that we only cook it to a lower temperature is if you notice in grocery stores how bacon is the exact same width. Well, even though we try to make our animals more consistent in live weight and in carcass weight, we still have variability. And so what you're going to see in the industry with this, with bacon, is once they come out of the smokehouse and they cool overnight and before they go into slicing, they will press the bacon, so press them down into a similar shape, so everything's the exact same shape. If we cook this to a higher endpoint temperature, let's say we take it up to 140, 150, 160 degrees, that makes this fat extremely brittle, all right? And so when it goes through the pressing and then ultimately it goes through the slicing, the fat tends to go through what we call shatter. Actually, and I think some of you have probably experienced this at home, is when you start to peel the bacon off of your package, if it kind of comes off and crumbles, that's where either the bacon was overcooked in the smokehouse, or more than likely what's happened is we've altered the fatty acid profile of that pig through feeding. You've got to realize that the fat quality in pork is extremely important, and what we feed the animal will ultimately show up in the quality of fat. This is why researchers at the University of Kentucky, as well as researchers throughout the country, when we start altering the pig's diet, we always pay attention to what's going on with this particular cut, because if we're going to see fat quality issues, they're going to show up in the belly first. And since the belly is a prized commodity off of this particular animal, we want to make sure that we're not altering the fatty acid profile, so that when it goes through the bacon goes through the pressing and the slicing. When I say slicing, the industry uses high-speed slicers. And so they'll actually set this, let's say, at 9 slices per inch. And that high-speed slicer can slice this entire belly quicker than you can snap your fingers. Okay, that's how you make thousands and thousands and millions of pounds of bacon, is through those high-speed slicers. And so we want to make sure when that big blade cuts through that bacon that we're not shattering that fat. We can also do a country bacon similar to the country ham, whereas the country ham, that cure is roughly around 75 to 80% salt. We may back off of the salt on this particular cut. We will put the cure on top of it. We know through research here at the University of Kentucky and other institutions throughout the country that salt will penetrate about 1 inch per week. So you look at this particular belly, he's about 2.5, 3 inches in depth at his deepest level. And so we know we put that cure on there, in about 2.5 to 3 weeks, this bacon will be ready for the smokehouse and then ultimately be ready for slicing and sale. There's a huge difference between a wet cured bacon that you get in a grocery store and a dry cured country bacon that you get in specialty shops. The fat will fry up differently. When you fry dry cured bacon, the fat will almost become translucent. You can almost read a newspaper through it. Dry cured bacon is not for those individuals that like their bacon to be super crispy. It just doesn't work well for that. So bear in mind, if you like your bacon super crispy and you have the opportunity to try and purchase a dry cured bacon or a country bacon, keep in mind that that bacon's not going to work very well. But If you want to kind of back off your degree of doneness in your bacon, you'll find that the country bacons have a very unique flavor as compared to the wet cured bacons. Last remaining piece, and we'll have a little bit of fun with this particular cut, is the loin, all right? The loin, 99% of the year, is the most prized commodity out of the entire pork carcass. It also is something that we can do a lot of different things with it. We can just simply come in here and cut blade chops, which now are being referred to as ribeye chops. We could come in here and cut loin chops, which the National Pork Association has altered the name to become T-bone chops, or we can cut sirloin chops through there as well. What we're finding out is individuals are not nearly as fond with bone-in cuts as they once were for various reasons. One of the big reasons is that, a lot of folks don't say, well, I don't have a dog, so I really don't need the bone, and I'm not going to eat the bone, so I'm not going to pay for the bone. And so we can make them boneless as well. And that's what we're going to do with this particular cut, is we're going to create a boneless loin and then show some of the cuts that we get out of there as well. But before we can do that, we need to take this off, okay? This is the skin. You can see there's our inspection legend here at the University of Kentucky. This product was inspected by the USDA, meaning it's cleared for sale, that this particular cut is wholesome, all right? And nothing real spectacular about removing this fat, is we just kind of come in here and take our knife and remove it and lift it up a little bit so you can see what we're cutting through here. And the ultimate goal is try not to score the loin. So if you're new to this, kind of take your time as you go through there. If you're watching my knife movement as I was going through here, you notice I kind of dipped in and then come back out with my knife. And basically, we're at this sirloin juncture where the sirloin meets the loin. There's a little pocket in there. And that's why I was doing that, is to reach down there and catch that pocket. That's just something that you get a feel for after you remove the fat and the hide off of this particular cut. Something you get a feel for after a while. We're going to continue to remove the skin or the hide, whatever terminology makes you comfortable. Again, what's neat about the pig is everything on this particular pork carcass has value. And we don't always have that luxury with beef and lamb, but pigs we do. All right, the old adage, we're going to use everything on the pig but the squeak, that's kind of the truthful aspect of it. When we're harvesting this animal, obviously the blood has extreme value because the pig's body is very similar to the human body. And so we will collect the blood, and there's individuals that will actually take the insulin out of the blood for diabetics. It's also used a lot in medical research. Here at the University of Kentucky, our medical teams over in the hospital, our medical researchers, a lot of times will come over and collect hearts and lungs and kidneys and various tissues off the animals to do research on, because the pig's body is very similar to ours. So all that has value as well. Even when we get to something like this, the fat and the skin, it has value. We can cut this up in little bitty chunks and fry it up. And here in the South and the Southeast, when we fry that up, we have stuff called cracklings, which is extremely popular. The old recipe a lot of Southern grandmothers would make was crackling cornbread, and this is the basis of it. Or we can take the skin and make pork rinds, and a lot of folks like pork rinds as well. So this particular animal has a lot of opportunity to add value to the carcass. There's some old research done back in the early 2000s, the late 90s, that indicated that about 70 to 75% of this pork carcass can actually be further processed into other items. That goes beyond sausage and hams and bacons, but also the cracklings and the pork rinds and things along those products. And we're just going to take this and put it in our bone barrel. And you can see we've got the fat. We can lean this up a little bit as well. Again, This fat has value. It can be rendered down for lard. A lot of individuals feel that the best pie crusts in the world come from lard. So we can lean that up a little bit right there. This exposed fat, or exposed lean underneath the fat that you see here is called false lean. It's just part of the muscle that comes down underneath the hide, subcutaneous muscle, if you will. And so we're left with a relatively trimmed loin. We're going to come in here. I'm going to swing this around so you can see what I'm doing here. This is the hanging tender, or part of the diaphragm, and it's kind of dehydrated, so we're going to put that in the bone barrel. But what I'm going to do now is remove this tenderloin, and basically with my knife close to the backbone, you can see it kind of cups in there. Just going to follow that backbone. And you got to be gentle. This is the most tender cut in the entire carcass, and you got to be gentle when you start pulling or you can tear it. And so I will gently kind of pull it out of the way to expose some of the seams. You can see right there is a seam, okay? And you can sometimes with your fingers come in here and just roll that guy right on out of there. Others prefer to cut it out so that we don't damage it. So you kind of get a feel for it after a while. This is simply fat right here with some lymph glands in there. We're just going to discard that. We can clean this up a bit. Take the lymph gland chain off of there. Take some veins out of there. We take things off, we call facing it. Facing it so it looks a little bit nicer. And there's a pork tenderloin. When I first started cutting meat in the late 1980s, we'd get a lot of these in there called pork tenderloin catfish. So that's a term you see used sometimes for the tenderloin, and I guess somebody felt that at one point it kind of looked like a catfish there. We can also come in here and cut medallions, however thick you want. Okay. If you're wondering how does this relate to the beef carcass, this would be the filet mignon in a beef carcass. This is pork tenderloin. Okay. One of the things I like to do when making this boneless is I like to remove this sirloin, all right? And you can see where that pocket of the sirloin is, where the sirloin muscle comes down and it meets the loin muscle. That's that pocket that I'm looking for. And I'll kind of visually mark that, and I'm going to come all the way across here, and hopefully you can see that. This is a separation between the two vertebrae, and just something I like to do. I learned it from an old professor of mine, is just kind of break that, and if you come over to the edge of the table, I will do it over here so you can see what I'm going to do. You can see basically I've cut through the disc. And you just kind of push down a little bit of pressure on that. There's a little knob down here that we're going to cut around right in there. So we should be able to come back through here and remove this sirloin. I'm going to have to wiggle around some of the bones. Just like so. You can see, just basically cut through the disc and then popped it down, and you see you got to cut around this little bone here and a few little bones there. That's an easy way of removing the sirloin from the loin. A lot of meat cutters have challenges of removing that cut, and that's over the years I learned that from a professor of mine that showed me that, and it's always come in handy to removing that sirloin. And then now basically we can make a boneless sirloin, just like so. And take our knife, once again I'm going to face it up just to make things nice and flat. And however thick you want it. We like things around here around 3/4 of an inch to an inch for the butcher shop. I'm going to stop. You can kind of see how it's not looking all that attractive. So when it starts to, because I'm an old retail meat cutter, things have to look nice and attractive. So now we have boneless sirloin chops. Some older nomenclature on this particular cut is sirloin cutlets. You see that sometimes out there. Fat's not a bad thing, folks. It helps with overcooking. Helps protect you a little bit overcooking, so we leave a little bit of fat on there. But you can see we took something that once was a bone-in product, made it boneless, and this is not a bad little product to cook out on the grill as well. Like I said, you'll either see these as sirloin cutlets or you will see them as boneless sirloin chops. Like I said earlier, this is a loin. We removed the sirloin. We removed the tenderloin as well. They're over here. Now we're going to make a boneless sirloin, and there's a couple ways that we can do this. Because of the way this particular animal was broke, we still have part of the backbone here as well as we have the ribs. And for what I like to do, this is the way I like to remove the loin. And you need to take your time with this because we don't want to leave a whole lot of meat on here. We want to get as much of the meat off of the bone as we can. You can see the ribs. I usually like to start with the ribs going away from me. And again, like we talked about earlier, you see how I got my knife pointed down towards the bone. I'm going to slowly just start making sure I follow that bone all the way around. And say, if you've never done this before, take your time, because this is an important cut. You see, I'm coming up there so much so that I'm going to have to, I kind of wiggle my knife around the individual vertebrae. Okay. See, I'm already down to that bone right there. Okay. Come back here. Now this is where it gets a little tough because we're out of ribs to follow, but there is a bone down in here, and you kind of have to visualize where that bone is. We're just going to go straight down, and there's a little bitty ledge. I'm going to cut around. Now, once we get around this, there's a small ledge. You could see when we came down through here, we hit that bone. The bones kind of make a little notch or a little ledge through here. And once I hit that, I kind of moved my cut and came back around it. And see, when I follow that cut all the way down, I'm at that backbone right there. Now, if you're skilled enough, you can follow it and change directions. But what I think is easier is once you get it down to that backbone that we showed on the other picture, flip it over like this. So this is the backbone we were talking about. And again, come in here, right next to it. Again, I'm just following it, the bone with my knife, and you can see how that guy slides right off of there, okay? And there's a boneless pork loin where what I like to do is we still have the bone, the blade bone back here, is sometimes you can grab the lip, remove that. So, we can continue to make this a little bit, take a little bit more of the fat off of here. Just like so. Get a feel for how this works after you do it a few times. Okay. Set our trim over here. Set our trim over here we're going to use for sausage meat as well. Even this up a bit. So now we have a whole boneless loin, which we can do a few things with. We can come in here and face it up to make it look nice. And let's say we want to roast. So there's a nice boneless pork roast, or we're having a big cookout. People want chops, so we come in here about an inch thick. Now, typically what I like to do is, what I see a lot of meat cutters doing is when they cut chops is they forget when you're cutting, you want this to be, if it's an inch on this side, you want it to be an inch here and an inch here and an inch here, so we have even cooking. What I see a lot of cutters doing is when they're cutting away from them like I just did, as soon as their knuckles hit the block top, they angle their knife one way or the other. And so what I like to do is slide it back towards the edge of the block So that now when I go down, the edge of my knife goes straight to the block top and I get a nice even cut. That's 1 inch all the way around. And again, if you're not skilled or comfortable with doing this, take your time when cutting these so that you get a nice consistent product. So we're going to continue cutting these chops. Now eventually you're going to get into something that doesn't look as nice. You can see we're starting to get into another muscle here. Okay. And you flip it over and you see. It just doesn't, a lot of folks are going to shy away from that. So what we like to do is flip it on its edge. Now this is important, okay? This is this muscle that we're wanting to avoid. I like to flip it to where this muscle is up top. And then I'm going to butterfly it open. And the reason being is sometimes there's a nice vein of fat in there. You see that vein of fat? If you do that towards the bottom, you're going to have a huge chunk of fat at the bottom. At least if I do it to where that muscle is pointing up and I butterfly that, I have it down here at the side. And now, this is where we get to a little fun here. We'll score it. And there you have a boneless country style rib. You can even go further and cut strips out of it as well. Last and certainly not least are these ribs right here, and I'm going to utilize our bandsaw to do this. Basically, what I'm going to do on the bandsaw is come in here and cut at the edge of these ribs to remove this backbone. You can see we're here at our bandsaw, and this is an extremely dangerous piece of equipment. You can see this has what we call a bone-in blade. It has a blade similar that you would use in your wood shop at home to cut wood. This does an excellent job of cutting through the bones of the particular piece of meat we're trying to cut through. And the reason why I say this is extremely dangerous is this blade doesn't know the difference between these bones and these bones. And so we normally will only let experienced people work on the bandsaw because it is extremely dangerous. And so we're going to turn it on. What I'm going to do is, to make things easier, I'm going to zip this front part off, cut it off, and then remove these backbones. Now, technically we would call these loin back ribs, but you know them better as babyback ribs. You can see, and these tend to go for a little bit higher price. They have a little bit more meat on them. You can see we had a little bit of the loin left on there as we cut those off. But loin back ribs, they're very popular. You're going to cook these the same way you would cook the spare ribs like we talked about earlier. All right. In a few short minutes, we have fabricated this pork carcass. This one side weighed roughly around 100 pounds. The total carcass weight was 200 pounds, roughly out of a 260, 270 pound pig. You can see all the cuts we got from, we have our ham, we have our belly, which we're going to turn into bacon, our Boston butt that you can either make pork steak out of it, or what we like to do here in Kentucky is make pulled pork out of it as well. Here's our picnic. Our boneless sirloin chops, our tenderloin, a boneless loin roast, various boneless pork chops, boneless country style ribs. We also have our babyback ribs, our spare ribs, and you're also going to generate a lot of pork trim. This is just a fraction of what we have from this particular carcass, but this trim we're going to turn into various sausages. At the University of Kentucky, we might make this into bratwurst or add some cheese to that bratwurst to create our wildcat tail. One of our more popular selling bratwurst is a bourbon apple bratwurst that we sell, where the apples come from Kentucky, and obviously the bourbon comes from Kentucky as well. Once you heat it up, the alcohol evaporates out of there. We also will make a variety of dry cured meats, like we make a salami, a dry cured salami, a Spanish style chorizo, which is dry cured, or we could even make it into a Mexican style chorizo, which is a fresh product. We make lanyagers and various products that we make them that we're able not only to educate our University of Kentucky undergraduate students and graduate students on how to fabricate these particular cuts and make these various sausages, but we also sell this to the public as well. As you can see, not a whole lot of technology required. With a couple knives and a steel and a handsaw, and we were able to fabricate this entire pork carcass. And I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned a lot. Thank you.